The problem is what you just highlighted, which is justice delayed is justice denied. If there is one thing that we will be remembered for this period, I think it is the reform that we will make to the broader rule of law topic, because that is when you can authentically say, yes, we are now a developed country.
Basic Law 101. You talked about if you don't have technical excellence, just don't even think about being in the game, right? And that's a very, in one sense, a Suits-esque, Harvey Specter-like, mentality, which is probably true about the legal profession. Mr. Shroff, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Abhinav.
I want to start with your own journey. You've been in the practice for more than 40 years, out of 25 of which you've led this company. I'd love to understand from your perspective what it's been like to lead Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas into a new era, and over the years, the lessons that you've learned about leadership and law and just being with people.
That's a great question, Abhinav. And firstly, on the 42 years, and of which about 27 years have been in leadership position, I think they've been a great blessing. I'm very grateful to Destiny for having given me this opportunity and having effectively been able to reinvent the firm multiple times. And as I do a little bit of a flashback on life and this career, many leadership lessons stand out, because leading a large organization is not merely about lawyering, but it is about a lot of other things as well. I think I've enjoyed the interactions with people. By nature, I am a bit of a builder, so I've enjoyed creating a huge talent pool and many careers. Each of those careers would be a part of my legacy as well, because whether I'm there or not, the values that I have been able to share and imbibe in a number of tall professionals will survive me. So I'm very proud of that. But as I uh, try to answer your question on what are some of the leadership lessons I've learned, let me summarize a few of them. So, first and foremost, I believe that we have to be clear about the why of what we do. And the why has always been something which has been a bigger theme for me than the what and the how. I reflect a lot on, why does this firm even exist? And there is a purpose to it. I mean, I think we fulfill a purpose. Some of our clients and well-wishers have said that this firm is like a national treasure as well. And I think considering how long we've been around, almost 107 years, and having been around in so many situations, both before and after independence, gives you a certain authenticity. So we defined our purpose statement as really about producing the finest lawyers for a just world. That is what drives us as well, and our values. And I'll come to that separately as well. So first point I think is as a lesson, leadership lesson. I think you'll be very clear about the why. The second lesson I've learned, and especially in a people's business, is that you have to lead with your heart. And of course, you need heart and mind both. But to really build an institution, you primarily have to lead with your heart, because you're dealing with people. The mind is the kind of more technical side, and I think you, of course, need that. That's the base stake. But it's mostly about the heart and the emotion. It takes me to my third point, that really institutions, whether they are business institutions or professional service firms like ours, the foundation is actually an emotional one. Everybody has multiple options as well, but if that emotional glue exists, and you have to actually do something in terms of your career and your actions to make people believe it, that is what creates stickiness with people. The fourth lesson, I think, for a leader is, and I'm being a little mischievous here, you have to drink an ounce of poison every day. It's a leadership lesson from Shiva, because every day there's a new ball that is bowled at you. No 2 days are the same, and there is there's a good and the bad. So I think just the ability to absorb adversity and be resilient is very important. You can't be a leader other than, because you take a lot of the pressure of the system, and only a leader can and should sort of do that. The fifth, and I can go on and on, but the fifth one I would say is that for a long lasting institution like ours, you have to be always moving with the times. Unless you are constantly refreshing yourself, it's very difficult to stay ahead. I mean, look at even your organization. It's also, of great vintage, and you continue to remain both dominant and relevant because you are inventing and reinventing all the time. You can have a long history, but unless you are constantly fresh, you're not relevant to the customer. So these are at least some of the lessons I can, as I said, I can go on and on, but five of them which really stand out for me.
Wow, that's quite an incredible set of lessons to learn. Even at TOI, we have this saying that we're not a 186-year-old company, we're a 186-year young startup. And I think to have that mindset also defines a lot of moving with the times, which is what you said. I want to dig deeper on institution building. You've been at this for decades, and institution building is a lot like cathedral building also. The people who built cathedrals never got to see them. How do you build effective, great, incredible, and lasting institutions?
So it's about the value system. So I mean, in fact, just yesterday I was having this chat with some of my partners in terms of the individual and the brand. You will find very few examples, but there are, of 200-year-old brands, and you are almost that. But the mortality of their leaders for the time being, takes you up to a particular point. So part of what we need to think about is what is it that you can create in terms of making your brand timeless, and that will survive you. So institution building is about really building the intangible, which survives you. Everything else will change. Your real estate infrastructure will change. Your people will change. Maybe your clients will change. But there is something about long-lasting institutions and particularly brands that last forever. So I use an accounting term for it, and I maybe literally use it 10 times every day. Is how do you build your balance sheet? And how do you, on the balance sheet, what are the appreciating assets that you build every day? And I think they're all intangible. They're your value system, they are your approach and philosophy, they are how you treat knowledge. Knowledge is very, very important, because at the end of the day, an organization like us, what are we vending? We are vending knowledge. So you have to make, of course, people, but also more importantly, you have to put knowledge at the center of the organization, for the which is kind of gives you a little bit of the raison d'etre for existence as well. So there are many which you could use for institution building, but I think it's ultimately about the value system. And you might have seen it on our email signature in terms of what our three values are. And it came as a response to a question where a few years ago we asked ourselves the question of why do we even exist, and what would the world have missed had Amarchand been not been there. And we came up with three words: character, competence, and commitment. These are the three things that we stand for, and which we try to demonstrate in our dealings every single day, both internally and externally.
We've talked a bit about how we can lead better and what are the general leadership lessons from all these years. We've talked about building institutions and you talked about value systems. I'm also curious about you personally and your journey, you know, going through a series of important cases, important periods in the firm's history, 107-year-old history, and just generally also being in the practice and seeing how the legal field in India has evolved to a very different extent. Would love to understand some of the lessons that you have learned along the way and the skills that you think have been important for you over the years?
So there are table stakes. I think good lawyering, technical knowledge, I think is our table stakes. If you're not a good technical lawyer, you're not even the game. And that applies for the firm as a whole. So technical excellence is a given. But I've seen, just as I've seen the history of the profession, and I've been around for 42 years in the practice, of which 25 as a leader. What we see today as the Indian legal profession is vastly different from what it was earlier. I call this the current modern Indian legal profession, since basically since 91, 92, after those reforms, because the manner in which transactional practice kind of evolved, and also how law firms and professional organizations are structured changed dramatically. So there is, to an extent, an element of the business of law as well, because we are large commercial organizations. We have over 1,000 lawyers and many other support staff as well. So this, by any chance, is by any count, is a fairly big enterprise. So the kind of professionalism that comes and which you learn over time in terms of how to manage such a large enterprise. And it's very different from how you manage a corporate. I think manage a professional service organization involves a very different set of human skills. There are 1,000 lawyers, means you have 1,000 egos, you have 1,000 aspirations as well, and dealing with each one of them. The command and control structure doesn't work as well. So that's the difference. I think it's a very difficult job, but it's also a very exciting job, because whether people stay with you long term or not, you actually change their life forever, and that's a very satisfying feeling as well. And I can, as I actually did a count of this 2 years ago, and I noted that in about just the last 20 years, 10,000 lawyers we have touched their lives. Over 10,000 lawyers, in terms of whether it's an internship or whether it's an associate or partners or others. So many people, and they make up our alumni today, and that's great. It's almost like I call it the Amarchand University.
Yeah. I'm also curious about how you think about people. You mentioned you have over 1,000 lawyers in the company, and how managing a legal services firm is very different from, a business company in that sense. But previously, you also said how they're both very similar at the foundational level. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how you think about people and how they are different and similar, the legal services versus.
Professional services, and particularly lawyers, have been described as insecure overachievers. That's the very nature of the beast. But they're also very fun people. They're always questioning. You have to convince them, firstly at a professional level, through their intellect and their mind, but at a human level, you have to deal with them through the heart and through emotion as well. So they are undoubtedly more complex. They work very hard. We are one of the most hardworking profession. um, I mean, maybe a little less than the medical profession, but almost there, because it's very demanding. And what also happens is you take other people's problems and make them your own, and you keep stressing about them, because you have to find the right answer as well, and that kind of weighs you down. So in our industry, uh, mental health issues and burnout is a very high proportion compared to a lot of the others, and that's been commented on widely as well. So that's, I think, the kind of uniqueness of lawyers. But now, that being said, I think we are also great innovators and great thinkers in terms of what is the foundations of society. I mean, even if you look at the history of our nation, Gandhiji was a lawyer, Jawaharlal Nehru was a lawyer, Vallabhbhai Patel was a lawyer, and they had practiced for a while as well. And you look at in the U.S., Abraham Lincoln, and there's so many. Barack Obama had a legal education. So it kind of that training equips you for public policy, and I think it equips you and makes you constantly aware of what is it that makes society work.
Which is a very different understanding and skill set from, say, a entrepreneurial organization whose sole objective is, say, to earn profits. Whereas in the legal services, you also get to learn a lot more about public policy, society, and
The humanities and absolutely. I mean, that not to undermine what businesses do as well. But yeah, we are different. We are different, and I think we contribute in terms of our kind of intellect and philosophy a lot to nation building.
Over the years, you were talking about your journey and some of the insights you've gathered along the way. One of the things I like to think about is that skills compound. They take time, but they compound exponentially. And the next 10 years for you, or for that matter, for anybody who's been in an industry for so long, are going to be exponentially better than the previous 10, right? It's going to add up. Which skills do you think will compound and people should focus on, especially in the legal services industry earlier on?
Yeah, I think speaking personally for myself, and then I'll generalize it to the profession. I think it depends on kind of what life stage you are on. So I'm in my mid 60s. And at this point, I think the sort of inner motivations are about giving back to society. I mean, the firm is doing very well, is running, and obviously I need to intervene from time to time, but it's a steady ship. But in terms of what personally drives me now, I think is not only giving back to society in general, but also having a big impact on the structure of the legal profession as well. And we should talk about that in terms of what perhaps even my wish list from the new government is going to be. Because one of the biggest things I think is a reform of the legal system and the legal profession. But we should have a separate question on that.
Absolutely. In fact, would love to understand that in more detail as we talk about that. I like to think of law, of the law, as code. And there is good code and bad code. And I think what you said right now about the reform of the legal system is a very good transition into that area. And something that I also was thinking about previously is that what makes good code and what makes bad code? Because ultimately, code is just a generalization of specifics, constraints, and things written out which you want to be enacted in a particular fashion. What is good law? What is good code?
So that's a very deep question. But let me sort of go back to perhaps, at least in Western thinking, of what were the origins of law. And different people could pin a different point of time. But in my opinion, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the tablets, with the Ten Commandments, that was probably the first time that the world got law of how should man live. And of course, when he saw his people before him, and he was so enraged that he threw the tablets and they broke, which raises a very interesting question that the frustrations are about how law is implemented and about how people behave, even when you show them the way. And that's a good metaphor for what we face today as well. There's nothing wrong with our laws today. I think a lot of the problem that society faces today is because of bad implementation or bad characters in the system who abuse what the law is. So your question on good law, bad law. So the word code, I think, is derived from codex, which is the wax on the husk of or the bark of a tree. And it's an important message there, which is that you need to be flexible in terms of how you can write on the bark of the tree, but also the hardness of the tree underneath it. And that's how the word code got developed. Now, of course, we use it for computers as well. So to specifically answer your question on what is good code and bad code, I think the principles of code should be clear and there's a hardness to it, but at the same time it should be malleable and it should be flexible to move with the times and to deal with different situations. And there are many metaphors that have been used, but some of them are the kind of what's called the 5 P's and the 3 A's. It must be purpose driven, it must be precise, it must be preemptive, it must be proportionate. What we're seeing today in a lot of the rulemaking that is coming out in India and elsewhere is it's disproportionate. I recently called it, shooting sparrows with cannons as well. So there is an element of proportionality involved as well. And in terms of really how do you actually make it work in society, I think it has to be not only flexible, there must be a kind of an aesthetic element to how you implement the law as well, because it's at the end of the day, all laws will affect people, and it affects humanity as well. So there has to be that human touch to it as well. And a lot of the laws are kind of missing that element today. It's interesting for India at this point of time, because there's one thing that has happened in the last 10, 15 years is we are moving from a relationship based society to a rule based society. And that happens with when a economy grows, and when a kind of a nation almost reinvents itself. And we are doing that now. I think I don't need to tell you, I mean, that what's actually happening in India. It's a new India that's emerging, and it's now moving to, it will head towards a developed economy. The rule of law and the legal foundations are going to be absolutely critical for that. We will not be a developed economy without a good legal system.
I really like the answer and the articulation that good law or good code has to be well grounded, but also has to be malleable, and how that ties into the legal foundations of the new India that we are entering. I'm also curious, and that naturally begs the question of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, right? There are naturally many loopholes that would arise in any such kind of situation where the principles are clear, but the spirit is varied. How do you think about that?
So this is a perennial debate of principle-based laws or rule-based laws, and India hasn't found that balance yet. We keep toggling between the two. The kind of bureaucracy, if I can say, comes up with rule-based policy and law, but intends it to be principle-based. The moment somebody actually finds a loophole to say, "Oh, you violated the principle of it," so we there and the foundation of that is that there is a trust deficit between the state and the policy environment and the subject of the law, whether it's a private citizen or some commercial enterprise as well. So it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game that is going on. So at some point, philosophically, and of course depending on the subject, we have to be very clear about, are we creating a culture of a principle based system or a rule based system. Eventually, the gold standard, I think, is a principle based system where everybody in society understands what the purpose of a law is and then abides by that. But today, the culture for a long time has been that if it's not forbidden, it's permitted, and it's better to say sorry than to ask for permission. Now that is changing as well because of this migration towards a more rule based society, and the fear of arbitrary enforcement sometimes is making people kind of not understand what is happening and defaulting much more to permission based culture. And that permission based culture becomes a problem if you don't get the answer. You are basically told, figure it out for yourself.
You mentioned about the purpose of Cyril Amarchand Mangaldas is to create
The finest
lawyers,
lawyers, the finest
the
lawyer.
finest lawyers for a just world. In this letter versus spirit debate, ultimately justice is when both converge. How do you embody this principle of justice in this context?
That's a great question. And we keep struggling with what the right answer is, because sometimes the commercial imperatives um, overpower the justice element of it. But in the profession generally, as a generalization, we can't sit in judgment over our clients. We, as human beings, we can judge each other, but as practitioners, once you accept a client, however problematic the client could be, we can't sit and judge them, and we can't impose our notions of justice upon them. But I think what we can do is to ensure that in terms of how we conduct our professional business, that we bring fairness, transparency. You're always, even if you're an opponent on a matter or in a litigation, you will always be trusted. So the kind of fairness and the ethics that you bring to and we are a profession, we're not a business. That is the fundamental core value that I think we do, and I think we imbibe in this firm. We imbibe it in each of our lawyers from the day of their induction. We have, for any new lawyer joining the firm, there is a 7-day induction actually in this very room, or even if the cohort is wider, we do it outside. And there is a deep ingraining of these values. Secondly, how we do our business on a day-to-day matter as well. And there are many metaphors that we use, but the one which I like is using mythology. I don't know if you heard of the four quadrants. So all Indian mythological characters, and in terms of how we actually decide on where we get into gray situations, there are four quadrants. There is the Ravana quadrant, which is bad in spirit and in form. Run away with somebody's wife and all of that. Then there is Duryodhan, who is bad in spirit, but the form was okay. I mean, yeah, he won the game of dice and all of that as well. You can't fault him on process, you can fault him on the spirit. Then there is, of course, the extremely good one, which is Ram, which is good in form and good in spirit. And then there's Krishna. Of course, I mean, he was very mischievous in terms of how he conducted his will. So, what we teach our people is try to be in the Rama quadrant on your advice, but if not, at least default to the Krishna quadrant. Usse niche mat jao. So, this is how, and that is how our, and this is folklore in the firm. I mean, in every induction and everywhere I tell them this, that ye do quadrant ke bahar mat jao, because a lot of people sometimes are, giving Duryodhan type advice. Uh, so that this is where, and then I use another metaphor as well, that if you're a counsel, be more like Krishna, not like Vidur. So Vidur was, of course, the chief advisor, like you are in a, and he saw the Vastraharan, but he just stood up, expressed his opinion, and sat down. Whereas Krishna actually did something about it, because he sort of just made sure that there was, endless miles of saris that came through. Very often, what today's lawyers do is just give their opinion and sit down without guiding the client what to do, guiding or helping. So the core of a good hardcore Amarchand lawyer is that they have to be Krishna-like.
That's quite an entertaining aside on Indian mythology and how that links to the legal system. I really love it. To be in the Krishna avatar, not just the Ram avatar, and definitely not go in the other two quadrants, the other two boxes. That's quite incredible. I also want to talk about the legal system in India, and particularly the legal infrastructure. And the natural narrative or trope is that law in India, of course, justice delayed is justice denied, one of the things that we were taught as kids. But I'm also curious about how there are so many cases, so few justices. And I think for a very well developed economy, you do need a robust legal infrastructure, right? We see that in the US, and there the legal system is sure has its own flaws. But from a third party perspective, perhaps it is very well developed. What do you think about the legal infrastructure in India, its system, its future?
So there's a plus and there's a minus. I think the fact is that we have a sophisticated intellectual legal system. I think the quality of the final output that comes out is world class, no question. The judgments that come from our senior judiciary are as good as any that you would get in the world. The problem is what you just highlighted, which is justice delayed is justice denied. And we've made so many attempts through alternate dispute resolutions and all of that. And, a leading jurist recently said that if you want to make in India, you first have to figure out how you will resolve in India. If you can't resolve in India, वो हमारा make in India भी नहीं होने वाला है. And I think there's a lot of truth in that, because today what we do is export it to Singapore and here and there and other. But how do you create the confidence in not only foreign investors but also Indian businesses, that no matter what happens, every business situation there will be some conflict and there will be something that needs to be resolved. But whether you have an efficient system or not to resolve it, I think is a huge area of risk, and it is particularly high in India. Now I have three answers to three things that need to be done, and I'll first deal with them in brief. I think first there needs to be a deep focus in terms of just the laws that have been written, because the problem starts with ambiguous laws, and the quality of many of them, leave a lot to be desired. Ironically, it's some of the older laws from pre-independent that still kind of rule the roost and have survived the test of time. So, but that aside, I think they have to also move with the time. So, my first point is we need to have better law making, and whether that is legislation or delegated legislation or rules or policies put out by independent regulators. So that's point number one. The second is the judicial system. We need to figure out how to get quick justice. And I think, at least in part, technology is the answer. And many nations have kind of moved towards it. I think the delays are not just because of judicial bandwidth. That, of course, is an issue. But a lot of the judicial bandwidth is clogged up by process. A lot of that process could be taken over by technology as well. So I think we can land up saving a lot of judicial bandwidth and time if we use technology wisely. And that's going to involve a lot of investment. And I think the third point is that the legal profession needs to be reformed drastically. I mean, the Chief Justice also last year in a speech mentioned that the legal profession is today is an old boys club. It should be kind of open to all, but it is not. So I think three things need to be done there. One is, I think the market needs to open up. I think we need to open it up to foreign competition, because it's become a joke internationally. Every time an international lawyer sees me and talks to me, he says, yeah, it's still 2 years away, right? And that joke has been going on for 20 years or more. So I think the first thing, and it should be done in a fair and transparent way. I mean, we've had a number of botched up attempts to open up the profession, and that's not going to happen that way. It has not opened up because it's just been botched up. There's no clarity. It's a conversation of the deaf, where there is, we don't even know who is taking that decision. So there needs to be, maybe a committee needs to, or a commission needs to be put in place to figure it out. Until we open up this profession to international competition of best in class, we're still going to remain a cottage industry. I am firmly of the view that we need more competition, because what has happened is that just in this kind of you can't be the top country, one of the top economies in the world, without access to a global legal service. Is not possible. You're not going to create that confidence. Today it's become a protection racket. I mean, in terms of all the the lawyers associations and others, it's nothing but a protection racket. So that's point number one. Secondly, I think the business model needs to be allowed. We are the only profession or industry which is forced into a partnership model. I think it's time that we should be allowed to look at a corporate model, because yes, it is a profession. Yes, it's not a business. But I think that the fact is that because there is also the element of business of law, there is a need for access to capital. For example, if we are to embrace big technology, where is all that capital going to come from? And only a corporate model will allow that. Secondly, just that business model in a pure general partnership model is basically a cash flow, and it's become a labor arbitrage. You're not really creating more long-term value, and we're too small for that. And I think the third, which will happen because it's still not developed globally, but it should happen over here, is that the commercial model needs to change. The core for the last 100 years has been what's called the hourly rate model. You charge for time. But the question is, does that really represent the value of what you get? And it doesn't. And it creates the wrong incentives. It creates the incentives that why don't you just take your time over it and multiply the number of hours so you will make more money? The philosophy has to move towards more value-based compensation, and AI is going to force that, because you will get an answer out of AI in a matter of seconds. How are you going to charge for that? So these three things need to fundamentally change. I think somebody should look at it and revamp this profession from top to bottom. Otherwise, I think we are headed towards a big problem here.
It's very interesting you say, especially the third thing in the third point you mentioned about how incentives need to change. And I think one of the things that you also talked about in one of your other speeches was how you created the incentives innovatively when you were building the firm. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so the mind goes back to I think the year 99, 2000, and it was about 7, 8 years after the liberalization. There was nothing like a career track. Partnership sizes were like, there used to be a ceiling of 20 partners. So what do you tell a young partner or a young lawyer who wants to start up, that wait for somebody to die, then there will be a vacancy? And that is exactly what used to happen at that time. So long story short, we actually worked with a leading international consultant and changed by creating a role model. And that is when the modern legal profession began, of creating career tracks, reforming the partnership model, the compensation model. And what you see today was the journey that we started at that time. Amarchand led that way.
Let's talk about your annual note, the annual note that you send out to the entire firm every year. One line from that particularly struck me, and I have this over here. To conduct the orchestra, one has to first turn one's back to the crowd. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I think the visual is kind of very clear, and I kind of look at this visual regularly in terms of how I should focus. And there's a kind of a Gita-esque element to it as well, because in comes of the kind of defining line of Gita, Karmanya Vadikaraste, it basically says you focus on your work, don't focus on the fruits. And what this other metaphor indicates is that don't bother about all the noise that is going on, and don't do stuff just for audience applause. Focus on your people, focus on the quality of the music that is being produced by the orchestra. Today what happened, because social media, everything is about how many likes did you get, which is the noise in the system. And for a leader who, again the metaphor of the conductor of the orchestra, it is a very lonely place. Firstly, I mean, any form of leadership is very lonely, and there is a lot of noise. So you have to, no matter what type of organization you lead, you will always get a lot of white noise, and you will get a lot of conflicting opinions. How do you cut through all that and take your own call? And that can only happen when you start ignoring all that noise and start using your own inner music.
I love that metaphor. I think it's gonna be with me for a long time. I want to also transition and switch gears and talk about a bit of the fun stuff. We've talked about the legal infrastructure, the legal system, building Amarchand, and so many other things. I want to talk a bit about the day to day of being in the law and add a fun element to it. I'd love to get your thoughts in a few quick answers. So, what's the most exciting part of being in the law?
So it's dealing with people. I love dealing with the talent in the firm, and I also love talking to clients. I mean, we came to know each other professionally. I mean, it's been so much fun. So a lot of my fun is comes from people, and the learning that comes with that. Every time you meet somebody new, you learn something from them, which kind of stays with you. And there are, of course, lots of other answers to the fun element as well. But what I really enjoy about the law is the people whom I meet, both internally and externally, and linked with that is the problems that we solve. So fundamentally, lawyers, if we were all kids, we would be that kid who is solving puzzles. That's our job. Yeah.
You take on a client, and the client has a good case or a bad case. What, in your view, is a good, strong case and a bad, not so strong case?
Yeah, inherently in your question is a kind of a adversarial element to it. Of course, there are transactions also, but I'll come to that. So I come back to what I said a little earlier of we can't be judgmental about the goodness or the badness of the case. It's two, three things. One is for me when I personally look at it, and different lawyers will have different answers. It's the quality of the outcome. It's secondly, can it help in improve somebody's life in terms of the fairness of the output? That can you get people justice? Again, this is kind of a more from a litigation lens. When if I were to put on my hat as a commercial lawyer, I think the answer would be a little: did I get the best outcome that I could for my client without compromising on the essential? Because in a commercial transaction, there's a lot of give and take. So, did you help in advising the clients wisely in terms of what should be the trade-offs that they should make and how to view things in SS? I find myself very often not just as a lawyer but also as a little bit of a therapist very often when you're advising your clients, or a kind of almost like a philosophical advisor of ये आपके लिए अच्छा नहीं है because of ABC reasons.
I remember when you mentioned to somebody, I want to be your friend, not your lawyer, and that's sort of aligns with what you're saying. Going off of that, what's a good lawyer and what makes a, lack of a better word, bad lawyer?
So technical excellence should be a given for any kind of lawyer, otherwise you shouldn't be in the profession. But I think for me personally, it is that who places the client's interests above his own. And I have demonstrated that in many points of time in my life. And we have situations, particularly when families are involved, I always trying to find a solution and get peace. Whereas if we provoke them into a fight that could go on for years, we earn a lot of money. But is that the right answer for the client? So always putting what the client's best interests are above your own commercial interests, I think makes a great lawyer.
And which is where the redesigning of the incentives is important.
But a lot of it comes from your personal philosophy as well, because there are lots of excellent lawyers, but who sometimes place their own interests above. So it's not just about knowledge; it is about really your values.
One of the things you said was how, when you take on a client, it's not the lawyer's job to judge the merits of the case or the client for that matter. And in law, you have to deal with facts. You have to create conviction. You have to develop opinions, and then you have to persuade another person. I'm curious about, with this background or foundation of you not judging the client, how do you develop conviction, opinion with the conflicting sets of facts and beliefs?
I think there are many aspects. One is, of course, diligence and thoroughness. 99% of a lawyer's job is to be thorough, and you have to be diligent. You or your team should have read every piece of paper that there is, and looked at every fact, because what you're paid for is to first just be thorough, and you can't miss a thing. You can't go into a case and find that you've not looked at a particularly important document. So I think that is kind of one. The second, I think, is then to use your both mind and heart in order to find the right instinct. About a lot of most things are in the gray, and you therefore have to use professional judgment. And I will answer in kind of non-professional situations. I have a slightly different toolkit, but in a professional toolkit, you also have to bring to bear your instinct. What's the difference between a good counsel and a not so good counsel? It is their instinct. And on the same problem, you can go to 10 lawyers, they will all come to it from a slightly different viewpoint. So you use your own personal value system, your knowledge, your experience, apply it to a common set of facts, and that's an art. So there's both a science and an art to it. And again, just to uh, your question on how do you form opinions, I think it is a combination of curiosity, diligence, and instinct.
And it almost sounds like, there are these two kinds of mindset, the soldier mindset and the scout mindset. And it sounds like what you're talking about is to be the scout, not the soldier, to have that curiosity, diligence, and thoroughness in terms of wanting to know everything. One of the things you said was that we're moving from a relationship based country to a rule based society, and that happens as a transition across economies. In your letter, your 2020 note, you talked about how we need to move from dhanda to rishta, and thinking of your business as a relationship business. Any thoughts on that?
That's a very deep question again, and this is what our sort of our personal belief system. And when you've been around for as long as we have, when I look back, what is it that's my real wealth? It is relationships. I mean, having been with so many clients and businesses over such a long time, you develop a relationship that goes beyond business, and where you actually bond with people, you kind of share their pain and pleasure as well. And that is what a law firm is, an idea, and it's an idea that is made up of many types of intangibles, one of which is its relationship capital. So relationship capital, I think, is the deepest capital that you can have. And this is something which I regularly kind of talk to the lawyers in the firm, is don't have a transactional approach to a client. You keep up the relationship. Someday it will result in business, but don't pursue it. A relationship is actually very valuable for its own sake as well. वो कभी धंधा आया नहीं आया doesn't matter. If it comes, that's great. That's a bonus. But don't build a relationship only for the purposes of for monetary gain, because firstly people see through that, and that's not what they value. If you want them to trust you in their most difficult problems, it will be because of the relationship, not because of commerce.
Going off of that, in your note, you also talked about buddhi and kala. And Just now, you talked about how it's an art and a science. And of course, today's zeitgeist is artificial intelligence. And you talked about how judicial processes, which take up a lot of time, most of them can also be automated using technology. And I'm assuming that also includes artificial intelligence. In the age of AI and tech, especially when looking up case laws has become ever so easy and so on and so forth, what is the value add if we are to move from an hourly rate to a value-based idea? What is the value add of a legal professional, and how can young aspiring lawyers develop that?
So I think you and I both know that we are sitting on almost a tipping point in the evolution of technology. Probably the next 12 to 24 months, it is estimated that AI will become more powerful than human intelligence. And that's both an exciting and a scary thought. Because at that point, without the kind of emotional value system which machines will not have, you will be able to create efficiency, but will you be able to create judgment? And when you come to lawyers like myself or my firm or other respected peers, you don't come only for efficiency, you come for judgment as well. And that's the difference between what I call kala, vidya, and buddhi. So what will become the premium ingredient is going to be the buddhi, where you are actually able to tell a client, all the evidence is in this, all the math tells you must do it, but don't do it. This is not right.
And that is something that AI can just not.
It just cannot have it. Yeah, yeah. And I actually, in a different context, I use like three types of expressions in terms of what you could be. You could be just a lawyer. You could be a trusted advisor, and the ultimate is you're a client whisperer. Whisperer, yeah. Whereas you actually can whisper in the client's ear and say, "Ye mat karo." And he actually that's the most valuable part for a client. Because they also get confused. Ye karna, nahi karna. Somebody's telling them do this, somebody's telling them do that. But the value of that whisper is what makes all the difference.
This has been great to talk about. I now want to switch gears and talk a bit about the macro things. I'd love to understand from your view the role and future of services in the evolving India, in a new India, in the Amrit Kal of India, as the philosophy has it.
No, we are in probably one of the most exciting phases of our post-independence history. And I think it's kind of universally acknowledged now that this is India's moment. You hear, references to whether it's India's decade or it's India's century, but there is common consensus that India is on the rise. And when it is on the rise and there is so much that is going on in terms of economic activity and social upliftment, I think you have to pay attention to one key aspect of the core infrastructure, which is the rule of law. And the rule of law itself comprises many things: the black letter law that is written, how justice is done and disputes are resolved, and how the profession functions at an international level. So I truly believe that the legal system broadly, which covers all of these concepts, is a very hard part of the core. It seems like a soft issue. It's actually a hard issue. It's a very core part of the infrastructure of the country, and I think due attention needs to be paid to that. So my advice to the new government, whichever it is, when they come to power, is to make this one of the top three priorities. Of just in whichever way we land out, just refresh the system, make it more just and more efficient as well. That if you look at things, 100 years from now or 200 years from now, if there is one thing that we will be remembered for this period, I think it is the reform that we will make to the broader rule of law topic, because that is when you can authentically say, yes, we are now a developed country. And you can never be a developed country just because you have the best roads or the best airports or the best factories if you don't have a legal system to match.
Sounds like you're pretty vocal and you're playing the statesman like role for leading or influencing this change in legal reform and legal infrastructure in India, which is a very different state and position to be in than to just say practice law as part of or leading a legal services firm, which I find quite intriguing and interesting. Bono has this saying that in order to serve an age, you have to betray it first. And I think time and again seems like, from your vantage point, you've done that. Uh, could you talk a bit about how and why that matters to you?
Yeah, I think and this has been a core part of our business practice and strategy since the last 2 3 decades. Of at any given point of time, we have a disruptive mindset. Because the only way in which you can bring change, and unless you're constantly embracing change, you can't serve an age. Otherwise, you become stagnant, and at some point, you atrophy and die. And that takes me to this very profound sentence from Bono, which actually is part of the firm's folklore of in order to serve an age, you have to betray it first as well. And that's a kind of a disruptor's mindset. And we have a very strong disruptor's mindset. If you notice, the strap line on our firm's logo is also ahead of the curve. And in that is embedded disruption.
How have you disrupted? What have you disrupted?
So many things, I think, just first in terms of the talent model, the technology model that we're constantly sort of experimenting with, the approach that we have brought to client service as well. Many things. It's not for no reason a that we have survived this long, and b that just in terms of how people think of us, in terms of a trusted advisor. I think it comes as a result of all of that. We've spent a lot of time and money and investment and energy on knowledge as well. So that's just basically running our practice well. But more importantly, I mean, at a personal level, I take an interest in a lot of public policy issues, and just sort of trying to advise policymakers and the state on all of that. And I think it kind of all adds up. It's a lot of small things, which are distinct, but they all add up to a disruptive mindset.
And what I like most about, just going back to another gear in this conversation so far, about how you want more competition in the legal services industry, which is quite interesting because you want it for the betterment of the entire profession, as well as for the entire profession to just evolve into a new era.
Yes, and I think before that, I would place the country first because for a economy, if you want to be a 30 trillion economy, how on earth can we even imagine that we will get there without a legal system to match? It's just the two just don't add up.
Resolve in India before.
Resolving, there's so many dimensions to it, just in terms of the efficiencies, and we are unlike China, because China's rule of law I won't comment upon, but we are far more liberal as a society and mindset. We have strong legal foundation, so I think we will need to fix this before you fix anything else, or at least concurrently.
This has been quite interesting. We've talked about the micro and the nitty gritty aspects of the law and the overall general climate and the future of the legal infrastructure, legal reforms, and so on and so forth. I want to talk lastly just about two things, which are a day in the life of Mr. Cyril Shroff, and two, the skill sets that are required for a law 101 expertise. So maybe we'll start with a day in the life. So could you talk about that?
So that's a great question. So no 2 days are the same. Every day is different, but there are some common elements as well. Um, I work hard because I like it, and I won't even call it work. I enjoy working, so it's more fun. I'm sort of always, even though I'm physically tired, I still feel mentally energized as well. So it's fundamentally a hardworking day, and I just love what I do. Second, I spend a lot of time in every day on a daily basis dreaming. I think it's very dreaming about a future, about the country, about everything that I love. I think it's very important to dream. If you don't dream, you can't do. So that and every day, even when there is a if there is some half an hour in between two client meetings or others, what do? You actually just think about the future. So that's the second part. And again, not I'm not a boring person. So one of the things which I love to do is I follow pop culture a lot. I watch my Bollywood. In fact, right after this interview, I'm going for a movie. I love my music, and as well. So I think it's important to remain fresh on that side as well. So that's the second part. Spending time with grandchildren is also a huge stress buster. So that's the third part. And what do I enjoy the most of everything? I think is institution building. I think more than actually being a lawyer, I enjoy building a legacy and building a long-term brand, because we will all go at some point of time. What will survive? I think it's only the brand.
That's quite touching, and it shows the human side that you do watch movies, you do
Oh, a
spend time
lot.
with your grandkids, you do have fun, and I think having that
I
allows
don't have
you.
too many friends, but I have very deep friendships.
That's
Yeah,
amazing,
yeah.
and I think that allows you to understand people, build more relationships, and that's
And
what's
I'm
important.
basically a very deep introvert, and I actually think introverts they have themselves for company,
Yeah,
so you never feel lonely.
yeah, no, that's right. I think being an introvert helps you to just be by yourself, and Blaise
I enjoy
Pascal.
my own company.
That's lovely. Blaise Pascal has this quote that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're saying over here, which is interesting. I also want to talk a bit about the basic law 101. You talked about, if you don't have technical excellence, just don't even think about being in the game, right? And that's a very, in one sense, a Suits-esque, Harvey Specter-like, mentality, which is probably true about the legal profession. In business, we have accounting and a host of basic skill sets. For law to succeed, what are those?
So there are actually, this is a very evolving subject, and there are many, many new concepts that are coming around. And just on a kind of more fun note, to the two most recent ones that I have heard, and which I like also, are first about it's a little bit of a satire on PEP. PE is profit per equity partner, which is traditionally how law firms can evaluate themselves. But the new version of it is purpose, empathy, and people. So a new, at least in a leadership position or a partnership position, your PEP should be one of these three. And one for probably the associates and mid-level lawyers is that you need to be an O-shaped lawyer. You need to be optimistic. You need to be original. You need to have a lot of empathy as well, and use your emotional intelligence almost as much as you use your IQ. And this is all true. I think we find that very relevant in terms of dealing with clients, and just the ability to just rely and give technical advice without empathy for a client. Client wants to feel cared for as well, and I think the human part as well. So the O-shaped lawyer is kind of another new innovation to that as well. But personally, I think at least in terms of some of the basic skills, and they will never change, is that you need to be hardworking and very diligent. You need to be very genuine. I mean, if you want to build long-term relationships, you can have a short. You can be like a comet which just kind of fades out. But if you want to be like a star that is there in the heavens for a long, long time, you need those long-term values.
So there's no set of hard skills as such, apart from the technical excellence, which goes without saying.
That's table stakes.
That's table stakes. But I think what makes a good lawyer into a great one is all these other things, the PEP and O-shaped mindset, which is what defines one.
Yeah, and I think one thing which is entering into it, but I'm probably the wrong person to talk about it, is technology skills. I think is becoming very important.
Tech skills as a lawyer.
Tech skills as a lawyer. So there's, I think Alvin Toffler said it, that the illiterate of our 21st century will not be those who can't read and write, but they will be those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And with the arrival of AI, that's what's going to be put on test. Our biggest competitor, I think, in future is not going to be another law firm or even international law firms. It's going to be an AI-enabled general counsel. He would probably come with something which a machine has produced and say, "Can you please look at this for 5 minutes?" Because it's probably been based on all the stuff that you have done in the past as well, and AI produced it for them, and now just have a look at it. This is our biggest competition for the future.
That's quite interesting, especially after you saying that you love and want more competition. AI
No,
is
we'll have to read. So, even when the first computers came, nobody went out of business. You just have to learn new skills. And that's why what Toffler said of learn, unlearn, and relearn.
This has been an incredible conversation, Mr. Shroff. There's one last question that I want to ask you. You've talked about hard work, diligence, being curious, having the technical skills as table stakes, the macro, the micro, the day in the life, the values, building institutions, and a lot more. If there's one perennial advice or lesson that you have learned over the years, which you think has guided you through all the 40 years that you've been and the 107 years of Amarchand, what would that be? Which is applicable not only to the general legal person, but to one and all.
It's a very hard one to say any one thing, but my wife and I discuss this quite often, and probably that one thing that stands out, and I'm thinking on the fly because we talk about it often, is purity of purpose. So if you have purity of purpose, everything will work out.
Define purity of purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I gave you the firm purpose, even your own professional purpose or what you want to do. So long as you stay honest and committed to that at all times, no matter what you do, eventually, life has a way of just kind of landing you in the right place. And I think I've had a successful life, and I have a lot more to go. I'm not at all done as yet. Picture bahut baki hai. Picture bahut baki hai, as they say. So it's so long as I stick to this one principle of just being pure to my intent and my values and my purpose, everything will work out. There will be ups and downs, but I think I will land well.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for this, Mr. Shroff. It was a pleasure speaking.
Thank you, absolutely, and thanks for the great questions. And actually, you made me think a lot about myself. Thank you.
Thank you.